Haiti Adams in for Esther Gitui-Hewitt. It's Tuesday, April 5th, and this is Africa 54.
The Ukrainian government says its evidence appears to show that Russia has committed war crimes. We'll have a report. A man accused of leading Sudan's feared Janjaweed militia pleads not guilty to war crimes charges at the start of the International Criminal Court's first trial over the Darfur conflict. And why was tuberculosis better controlled until COVID-19? We'll explain.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday, updating the body on Russia's invasion of his country and on the alleged killings of civilians by Russian forces. His address comes one day after the U.S. President Joe Biden said Russian leader Vladimir Putin should face a war crimes trial. Tuesday's special UN Security Council meeting also includes briefings from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths. A host of European nations, including Spain, France, Sweden, Italy, Denmark and Lithuania, are expelling Russian diplomats from their countries over alleged war crimes by the Russian military in Ukraine. Now, Russian-backed troops are gathering bodies of the dead in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol and taking them to a local morgue. Some of the bodies were in military uniform and appear to be Ukrainian soldiers. Mariupol has been the scene of fierce fighting between its Ukrainian defenders and the Russian military, supported by separatist forces from the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. In an interview with the media on Tuesday, President Zelensky says Ukrainian efforts to push back Russian troops from Mariupol are facing difficulties. He also said Ukraine appears to have no option but to negotiate with Russia to end the fighting.
Всі ми будемо сприймати навіть можливість про перемовини. Я не про зміст.
All of us will perceive even the possibility of negotiations. I'm not even talking about the content of the talks as a challenge. The challenge is internal. First of all, one's own human challenge. What shall we do now? Then, when you pull yourself together, and you have to do it, I think that I have no other choice.
Now, the scenes of devastation left behind in Bucha and other suburbs is a galvanizing condemnation of Moscow. The U.S. State Department, at the request of Ukraine, says it will support a multinational team of prosecutors who will collect evidence of alleged atrocities by Russian forces. Now, in the wake of Russia's withdrawal from towns surrounding Kiev, residents say they are heartbroken by the death and destruction left behind. The Ukrainian government says its evidence appears to show that Russia has committed war crimes. VOA's Heather Murdoch reports from Kiev and Vinnytsia in Ukraine.
This plot of land in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, has been set aside to bury and honor civilians and soldiers killed in recent battles and future war victims. Over the weekend, as Ukraine announced it had retaken towns surrounding the capital, gruesome reports emerged about the deaths of hundreds of civilians, with many bodies left on the streets. On Sunday, a giant fire raged in the southern port city of Odessa after Russian airstrikes hit an oil processing plant and fuel depots around the city. In the cemetery in Kyiv, the facility's director says the war may now be focused further east and south, but he thinks the relative peace in the capital is temporary. Since the war began in late February, 30 missiles have hit this cemetery.
It is impossible to feel safe here. For example, on March 2nd, during the escalation in Bucha, missiles hit our cemetery within 100 meters of the workers. The workers hid inside of the graves, and after the hit, kept digging.
Locals say they are shocked and heartbroken by the recent death and destruction. Kyiv remains a tangle of barricades, and the remnants of bombed buildings still lay exactly where they fell after being hit. Russia says it has withdrawn from Kyiv, but some believe they will continue to attack in other regions.
I don't trust them. I think they are regrouping, and it could be even worse if Russia moves more troops to the east. It's not easy for Ukrainian soldiers to protect those regions.
In the western part of the country, where air raid sirens are heard daily, even though attacks here are infrequent, leaders say their government is preparing civilians to withstand battle.
We provide different kind of training: first aid, chemical attack drills, air raid instructions, defense skills, including defending the buildings we are in now, the city municipality.
This school in Vinnytsia is being used to house families who are among the millions of displaced people in Ukraine. Many say they are furious.
If we have to, we will fight them with our bare hands and tear them apart for killing our children and everything else they have done.
The war in Ukraine has forced about 10 million people to flee their homes, and the United Nations says roughly half are children. The Ukrainian government says mass killings in Bucha and other towns near Kyiv appear to be war crimes.
Well, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says her group is gathering evidence of possible war crimes committed by Russian forces in the Ukrainian town of Bucha. Michelle Bachelet is expressing horror at the images of civilians lying dead on the streets of Bucha. Under international humanitarian law, the deliberate killing of civilians is a war crime. Well, standing by live via Skype in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv is VOA's Heather Murdoch. Heather, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us, what is the latest? You've just returned from Bucha. What did you see? What did you hear? What is the latest?
As you might imagine, the town of Bucha is in shambles. Many buildings have been bombed. There's debris everywhere. The few people that we met emerging from their homes looked shell-shocked. Many of them told us horrifying stories of going outside of their houses briefly and being encountered by soldiers with guns pointed at them. They're also stunned and horrified and obviously very sad over the large amount of civilian deaths in the area. We also saw the authorities pick up 6 bodies. They did this very ceremoniously. These are some of the last bodies remaining that they're finding. And they wanted to show us, the journalists, that they are retrieving them, and told us that they are identifying the bodies one by one. And so far, they've identified 170 people.
Heather, a lot of this just absolutely grisly. I mean, we're hearing reports of mass graves, burnt bodies, people's hands tied behind their backs with bullet holes to their head. Really gruesome stuff. What are Ukrainian officials trying to piece together here, and what do they want to do with what they find, and what do they want the world to do about it?
What they're trying to do now is find and present evidence of war crimes, which they very strongly believe happened here. So, for example, they said the bodies that we witnessed them picking up and taking to the experts, they said these people were shot, and there were 4 women among them, and then their bodies were burnt. And they said the point of this was to potentially cover up war crimes. So they're bit by bit gathering evidence, and they are very much hoping that this evidence will support the international outrage that's already happening and make it so that this outrage can turn into action.
Well, speaking of that international outrage, the US and European leaders, of course, calling for Russia to be held accountable. Do you believe, and from what people are telling you, do you get the sense that this might actually be some sort of straw that breaks the camel's back and could then lead to a war crimes investigation?
Many people in Ukraine are desperately hoping that that is true. As you mentioned before in your report, there are other places that are controlled right now by Russia, like Mariupol, And people are saying that as horrible as what happened here was, there are so many places where we don't know what has happened yet. So they're very much hoping that the war crimes allegations are taken seriously by the international community, investigated, and the perpetrators are punished, in the hope that when other places are discovered and what happened and the events of these days, these war days, become clear to the outside world, it is not as gruesome as what we have seen in the past few days in Bucha.
Heather, stay safe. Thank you so much for that. That is VOA's Heather Murdoch reporting live via Skype from Kiev, Ukraine. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine becomes deadlier, world leaders are horrified by the video coming out of Bucha. VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb has more, and we do want to warn you that this video contains graphic images and may not be suitable for all viewers.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Bucha, less than 30 kilometers from the capital, where bodies lie motionless in the streets, some with hands tied behind their backs.
It is very difficult to talk when you see what they have done here. People left in barrels, basements, having been strangled or simply tortured. These are war crimes, and they will be recognized by the world as genocide.
The Pentagon says it's obvious Russia is responsible, with President Joe Biden on Monday condemning the brutality.
And what's happening in Bucha is outrageous, and everyone's seen it. Up to Allah. No, I think it is a war crime.
What are you going to do about it, sir? Are you going to do more sanctions on Russia?
I'm seeking more sanctions, yes.
Russia has denied responsibility and called the images out of Bucha fake.
After the Russian military had left, according to the plans and agreements, a fake was staged that is now being spread throughout all media channels and social media by the Ukrainian representatives and their Western patrons.
But satellite imagery shows bodies had lain in Bucha for weeks before Russian troops left. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said most of the Russian troops amassed near Kyiv and its suburbs have retreated, moving out to resupply as Ukrainians attack them.
The Russians have, at least for the time being, given up on a ground offensive against Kyiv.
Western officials say Russia now appears ready to focus more on the Donbas region to the east, which has seen recent increases in Russian airstrikes and military maneuvers. And Ukrainian officials warn that atrocities in the towns and cities that they haven't reached could be even worse than those in Bucha. Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
The man accused of leading Sudan's feared and horrifically violent Janjaweed militia pleaded not guilty to dozens of war crimes charges on Tuesday at the start of the International Criminal Court's first trial over the Darfur conflict. The brutal Darfur campaign in Western Sudan shocked the world, driving 2 million people from their homes and leaving at least 200,000 people dead. Human rights groups say Ali Abdel-Rahman helped carry out a deadly campaign led by the then government of Sudanese ruler Omar al-Bashir to crush a 2003 rebellion in Darfur. Abdel-Rahman is accused of overseeing thousands of government Janjaweed fighters. The militia was responsible for the persecution, murder, rape and torture during the height of the violence in 2003 and 2004. His lawyer says the court has the wrong man. Now, for more on the story, I'm joined now by John Tanzer. He's the managing editor of VOA's South Sudan in Focus program. John, so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to always be on this program.
Oh, wonderful. You know, John, this has been a story that I don't know if we will ever forget, even though this transpired around 20 years ago. So we saw today the first day of the only war crimes trial in connection with the brutal Darfur campaign. What do you know about what happened on day one?
Well, on day one, Ali Kushayb pleaded not guilty to all the 31 charges pressed against him for allegedly committing crimes and, genocide in Darfur. And the defense lawyers have been telling the stories of victims who have given details of how they were picked, arrested, shot, and even women who were raped and called names, you know, derogatory names. And so all this has been under the Janjaweed paramilitary. Janjaweed were used, you know, by Bashir to crush the insurgency in Darfur, but they did not succeed in that. Instead, civilians were the victims, because what happened is when a village is attacked, those who are left there, women and children, and then these women are told, you are the wives of the rebels, tell us where they are. And so those crimes were committed under those circumstances.
John, give us some background into Abdul Rahman himself. Who is he? You know, there's a lot of questions now around his identity. For one, his lawyer is telling the court that you've got the wrong man. Who is this man?
Well, this man was operating under somebody's supervision. The elephant in the room is Omar Hassan al-Bashir, Sudan's former president, who was the commander-in-chief of the Sudan Armed Forces. And so the paramilitary was operating under the directions of the Sudan Armed Forces. And Bashir was the commander-in-chief of the Sudan Armed Forces. So if Kosheb is saying he's the wrong man, then Bashir is the right person to be there at Hague.
Well,
you know?
well, yeah, you have a point there. I mean, a lot of the focus is on the man in the dock, but you say it's also about the man who is not in the dock. So seeing Abdul Rahman on trial in The Hague, and then the image of Omar al-Bashir not being there. I mean, what kind of message do those two juxtaposing images send?
If you look at it, the people in Darfur are sad. You know, our reporters spoke to IDPs, internally displaced people in several camps in Darfur, and they're saying, yeah, we welcome the news of Kusheb standing trial at ICC, but we wish Bashir was standing next to him, because Bashir was the one giving all the orders. Even the current head of the Sovereign Council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, was in charge of logistics in the Sudan Armed Forces in Darfur. So all these atrocities were being committed under their watch.
You know, John, this case has also brought to light sort of the limits of the International Criminal Court. It can issue arrest warrants, but it doesn't have a police force to actually enforce those warrants. So in part, of course, the ICC relies on governments in question to allow these kinds of serious investigations. What efforts have you seen and heard of in your reporting? What efforts are there on the part of the government in Khartoum to help bring more perpetrators to book?
When Bashir was toppled, the new government that was there in Khartoum, made up of the military and the civilian, under the leadership of former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, the former ICC prosecutor Bensouda came to Khartoum and met with the members of the Sovereign Council, and she was greeted, and the deputy head of the Sovereign Council, Hamdan Dagalo, told the press that, you know, Sudan will, if you like, cooperate with the ICC. And so there was a sort of memorandum supposed to be signed between Sudan and the ICC to extradite Bashir and those who are, you know, accused of committing atrocities in Darfur. But all that dwindled when the military toppled former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. He was brought back, he resigned. And so as it is now, you don't know where the status of Bashir in connection to ICC stands. But when the military took over, they toppled Bashir, the first statement they said was, they are not going to hand any Sudanese to a foreign court. They said Sudan has competent court, the judiciary is independent, so whoever committed crime anywhere in parts of Sudan will be tried at home. So that message was very strong, and a lot of analysts are saying they are not sure if Bashir will be handed over to ICC.
And this is, it feels like a story that's been going on for a long time and that we still have a long way to go. John Tenza, thank you so much. John Tenza is the managing editor of VOA South Sudan in Focus program. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to be joined live now via Skype from the Netherlands by Nimat Ahmadi. Now, she's the founder of the Darfur Women Action Group. She is going to tell us a little more about what happened on day one. Nimat, hello and welcome to Africa 54.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me.
Nima, the first day of, as I was telling John Tanza, the only war crimes trial in connection with the Darfur campaign got underway. What are you hearing about what happened on day one?
Well, we were here right at the court at the hearing, and on day one, it was the opening of the trial, whereby the prosecutor laid down his account of how his team collected evidence and what the situation looked like for the victims and how it has been long time that it was a long overdue justice for the victims, and then also the prosecutor's team, the investigators, that also presented their evidence, and it just we have a large number of diaspora communities here who came from. I came from the United States. There are people who came from Italy, France, Germany, and here within the Netherlands, there's a large diaspora community who also came. So the emotion was like really high. It's kind of like people welcome the beginning of trial as something that we have waited for so long to see, but also it's just hearing the stories that we hear every day also keep telling the stories. So at least it is finally that the first ever opportunity has presented itself for the victims for the first time to get those stories in a court of justice.
Well, Nima, this is the first day of what looks set to be a very long process, and we do thank you for joining us. That was Nimat Ahmadi. She's the founder of the Darfur Women Action Group. She joined me live via Skype from the Netherlands. But for more on the story, we will be following this in coming days and weeks, and we will keep you updated and informed. We're going to take a short break here, and when we come back, tuberculosis is a highly infectious airborne disease that accounts for more than 1 million deaths a year. According to the World Health Organization, people living with HIV are particularly vulnerable to this disease. Although it's present worldwide, most patients are in low and middle income countries. And for more on the impact of this disease, Africa 54's health correspondent Lenore Madu spoke with Dr. Michelle Gassana, the WHO medical officer at the Regional Office for Africa.
10 million of people are supposed to be ill, to feel ill with tuberculosis, and 25% are living in Africa. The mortality is of the overall people with tuberculosis is 36% in Africa. Only half of the person that have TB are diagnosed in Africa. So the coverage is very low, and this contributes to this high mortality. And the contributing factor are HIV infection, malnutrition, alcohol abuse disorder, diabetes, tuberculosis remain the main cause of death of people living with HIV in our continent. We are testing people, we are putting them on antiretroviral drugs, so the level of their immunity increase and they are less prone to have tuberculosis as a complication of HIV.
How does a person know that he or she might be infected with TB?
The conditions that are recognized as TB are shortening of the breath, the chest pain, state of fatigue, and the long duration of this symptom. If it is also combined with HIV, it can mimic many types of disease. So you can have spinal disorder, you can have even meningitis, and tuberculosis affects all parts of the body. But the most common form is that form that is contagious, that is this chest problem with the cough that is more than 2 weeks.
So when you look at the big picture, working on TB control. What do you see as some of the pressing needs presently, and how can they be addressed?
Access to care. And access to care means decentralization of all TB services, diagnosis and treatment to all the population at point of contact of the health system. So that needs a lot of investment. We need also to address other determinants of TB. HIV is well addressed, but there's nothing to address malnutrition, poverty, poor living condition, alcohol abuse, and diabetes. So we need a multi-sector approach, and we need to encourage him, to support him, to provide even some meals and other supportive social measures in order to help for adherence.
One of the issues that has been mentioned many times in the treating TB is drug resistance. What can you say with regards to drug resistance?
Poor performing national tuberculosis program are also the cause of drug resistance. Interrupted supply of tuberculosis drugs is also one big contributing factor for the emergence of drug resistance. The responsibility is on both sides. So I won't blame the patient. So I will take the responsibility of the health system by being more empathic, more patient-centered, and also take care of the drug supply. So we had also during these 3 to 4 years observed the emergence of the validation of the new all-oral treatment for drug resistance. Before, you need to have painful injection, and you imagine the adherence will be very low, and even the duration of the treatment was very for 1 to 2 years. Now it's reduced to 9 to 6 months now. So it's a progress. So progress and new drugs are in the pipeline. TB is curable. If you give us the resources, we are going to deliver with the community, all the stakeholders, and all the sector in charge of other determinants like fight against poverty and fight against non-communicable disease like diabetes. We are going to reach the global objective of eliminating TB by the year 2013.
Dr. Jean-Louis Abena, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Africa 54's health correspondent Lenore Madu there speaking with Dr. Michelle Gassana, the World Health Organization's medical officer at the Regional Office for Africa. And that's where we are going to leave it for today. From our team here in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Go well. Goodbye.